across the street from this property. The property is in Ward 4, right across the street from Ward 5. And then certainly impacts, I think, Ward 7, which is like right down the street. So, and our overall entire township. So I want to thank Commissioner Mulrooney for being here. And then I very much want to thank Steve Norsini, our township engineer, Kevin Kochansky, who is our codes officer, as well as our director of community development for the township, and John Rice, who is our solicitor, who is here to keep us all honest. Thank you, John, for being here. And thank you all the residents who've signed on for tonight. We are going to be talking about the Roberts Road property, the formerly known as the Village, formerly known as Gemma. Well, it's still owned by Gemma, but as we all know, the property is formally up for sale. And what I just want to do is try to keep the residents as part of the process as possible. We have had no specific plans come forward for the property. We are not aware that any sale has taken place. This is really just to be proactive. I think that one of the things we see sometimes in the township when we have, various larger areas that come up for sale, that people don't know about what's happening there until something's happening there. And what I want to do is keep the residents engaged and involved. I want to hear from everybody as to what the concerns are, as that property could potentially develop. Kevin will share with us what it can potentially be developed as. I have some questions around some things that have come forward to me from residents as to what, could go there. So I want to see what might fit in with the zoning. Steve will share the information about the land development process. And then we can kind of talk about resident concerns and we can ask questions. But again, we don't have, and Steve and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had nothing specifically come forward to us. We're not looking at any land development plans. We are unaware of any specific sale of the property at this time.
Commissioner, you are absolutely correct. Nothing that I'm aware of has come across my desk in terms of approvals for anything moving forward with the sale or redevelopment of the site at this point.
Okay.
The same with me. I've seen nothing.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to, I don't know who wants to go first, Steve or Kevin, who
I'll just be real quick, and my colleague Kevin Kashansky is going to get into a little more detail, and he's our zoning officer also. But when a property comes in for development, they go through the land development process, and that's a process that a landowner or an equitable landowner goes through the township to develop a property, whether they're going to create lots for single family homes, townhomes, a building, office, whatever it may be. And in its simplest form, an application is submitted to the engineering department. And in that application are plans, stormwater calculations, possibly a traffic study if required. So the engineering department, through the use of not just staff, but we also use outside consultants, will review that application, those plans, against our subdivision and land development ordinance, our stormwater management ordinance, as well as our shade tree ordinance. It's going to go to the Shade Tree Commission. Everybody in land development has to go to Shade Tree. So the first step in that process, and that's if there's no zoning issues or anything like that, and Kevin can get into that. The first step in that process is to go before the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is an advisory board. They can't approve a plan, but they can recommend approval or denial or approval with conditions. From there, again, this is a very abbreviated version. Concurrent with that, they would go to Shade Tree Commission. We just had one go there the other night. That was the Concordia development, the Eastern College site by Valley Forge Military Academy. That was before Shade Tree. They go to Planning Commission, they get a recommendation. They then go before the Board of Commissioners for 2 meetings for preliminary plan approval. One is a caucus, which is an informational meeting, and the next one would be where they're seeking approval. So we're going to have that Monday night. 200 South Ithan has gone through this process as well as others. They're going to come in. They came in for the caucus, went through the project. This upcoming Monday, a week from today, they'll be before the board requesting preliminary plan approval. That's a first big step. After preliminary plan approval, they go through the whole process again. They will be before Planning Commission and they will be back before the Board of Commissioners twice. So depending on the development and its impact, I may require a traffic impact study. That's within our purview. The land development ordinance, if a builder felt they could not comply or did not wish to comply with one of the items in the land development ordinance, we call it SALDO, subdivision and land development, then they would request a waiver from the board. And that's solely at the discretion of the Board of Commissioners. It doesn't go elsewhere. So I made that a very short process, but actually that takes months and months to go through. So that is the very, very Cliff Notes version of a land development application. And I'll toss it over to Kevin Kashansky.
Great, thanks, Steve. Good evening, everyone. And I think what's also important to note is that everywhere along this process, there is heavy public involvement, whether it's you communicating directly through your commissioners, through the township manager, or at any one of these public meetings. There's always an opportunity for the public to weigh in on a topic. I'm going to share my screen and go over, let's see here, a presentation that I prepared. And hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So this is the currently 452 South Roberts Road. It is currently zoned PI. The permitted uses are enumerated there. Those uses, the first couple of uses, college.
Kevin,
private.
I think you're showing the wrong screen right now. You
Yes.
just have the agenda up.
Okay. Let me. Is the PowerPoint up?
It is
Not
not.
yet.
It's a Word document with the agenda on it.
Kevin,
Okay.
you're probably gonna have to stop sharing and then reshare and select the PowerPoint.
Okay, let me just. Okay. Did you unshare me, Ian?
Yeah, so if you try sharing again, select the PowerPoint. I think you just had the word
Yes.
selected.
There
It's
we go.
perfect.
There you go.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry about that. It was showing on my screen. Technology. All right. So again, the site is currently zoned PI. The permitted uses by right, college, private, or parochial elementary school, other similar educational institutes for academic instruction, a convent, monastery, church, or similar religious institution, student infirmary, including a rectory or parish house, but there's some limitations on the number of dwelling units with there. The next group of uses are what we call uses permitted by special exception. These are uses that have to appear in front of our zoning hearing board prior to the land development approval, and they would be approved through that. The zoning hearing board can, it's a use that is permitted, but the zoning hearing board can put reasonable conditions upon a project, hours of operation, things along that nature. So that would include a museum, institution for the home or children, the aged, the indigent, or the handicapped, mental or health facility, convalescent home, nursing home, or similar health facility. I talked earlier a little bit about the zoning. So right here in the middle of the screen with the star in it is the subject site. You can see all of the adjacent parcels on that side of South Roberts Road are zoned R residential for R1, R1A, and R2. We have a little bit of institutional across the street, but also flanked on either side of that are residential developments. So any rezoning of this parcel to anything other than planned institutional would need to be consistent with adjacent zoning. So we would be looking at one of those three, R1, R1A, or R2.
Kevin and I think it's worth to note, if you go back, the Board of Commissioners actually denied rezoning of a property, yeah, where Kevin's arrow is right there on Roberts Road. the other evening. They wanted to rezone it to institutional, and the commissioners denied that.
Thank you. An area, I'll give you a little bit better perspective as to what exists on the site, and try to give you a little bit more context with the surrounding properties in the street network. So we talked about the development process that Steve talked about a little earlier. It can involve some or many of these processes. A zoning petition, either to change the zoning of the site, as Commissioner Borowski just mentioned, or a zoning petition to amend the language of the zoning code to allow different uses or different area and dimensional requirements, impervious coverage, setbacks, things along that nature. Conditional use approval, very similar to the special exception approval, except for conditional use is done at the Board of Commissioners level. And again, reasonable conditions can be imposed upon the project by the commissioners if they so deem appropriate. Then it would move through the land development approval. Steve talked a little bit about that. Once it gets through that multi-step process, we move on to the grading permit approval, building permit approval, and then outside agency approvals. Outside agency approvals can include the Delaware County Conservation District, DEP, Sewer Authority approval, all sorts of the PennDOT for state roads, road openings, and things like that. When talking about timelines, if you're going to go through a zoning ordinance amendment, it's a 12 to 18 month process, and that's either for text amendment or map amendment. Preliminary plan approval or conditional use approval can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. You're probably the better part of a project like this in that 12 to 18 month range. And then similar for final plan approval. Here, they're really kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I'll get a little bit into detail about those two processes. The grading permit approval process, because something like this has already gone through a heavy engineering review, could take 3 to 4 weeks. Again, we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's to make sure that the system in place is meeting all the code requirements. Building permit approval, this is actually something that is mandated by the state for any non-residential property that is going to go through any kind of building construction. The township has 30 business days to approve that. Obviously, 1 to 2 months is a little bit more than the 30 business days. It equals about 6 weeks, but sometimes there's some back and forth to get the plans up to the current building codes. And again, the outside agency approvals. So when a project initially is submitted and an applicant intends to develop the property, they try to determine if it meets code. Sometimes staff assists them and meets with them ahead of time. Otherwise, they just kind of go on their own. If it does meet code, then they would apply for land development approval. If it does not meet what the developer would like to do on the project, either because the zoning doesn't allow it or it's in the wrong district, the project could either stop or the applicant could seek relief. And that relief would come in one of two things. They could either file for relief from the zoning hearing board or through the commissioners, petition the commissioners to amend the zoning ordinance. And the zoning ordinance amendment process, we can get stuck in an endless loop going through this. The applicant or the commissioners could direct staff to prepare amendment. That amendment is then brought in front of the commissioners as a petition for their consideration. It is at that point that a public meeting is held. Again, public comment is sought during this process. And if it's not accepted for review, obviously it doesn't meet code, so the project would stop. If it does, if it is something that is accepted, then that amendment is forwarded to the township and county planning commissions for review and for comment. And again, during those meetings, plenty of opportunity for public input. Once it gets through that and the comments are offered back to the commissioners and ordinance is introduced at the commissioners meeting, from there, a public meeting is held. If at any point in time this ordinance is changed of any substance, it starts through this cycle. So that can go round and round in the circle for months if need be to get the ordinance right where it is needed to be and intended as the governing body would like it. Once the amendments are done and it's gone through that process, then another public hearing is scheduled for the commissioners to vote to amend and adopt the amendment. If the ordinance is approved, the applicant then can file a land development approval under those new changes. If it is not approved, if there's not the votes on the board to support it by majority, then the project would stop because, again, it would not meet code. Steve kind of went through the land development process. I'm not going to kind of reiterate this, but just to say that everywhere along this process where there is a public meeting, there's opportunity specifically for the public to come to the podium and speak their mind. So at Planning Commission meeting, at both commissioners meeting for an introduction caucus and then for a vote at the preliminary plan stage, and then again at the final plan stage, at each point, the public is offered an opportunity to comment. And that kind of wraps up the development process.
Thank you, Kevin, very much. I have a quick question around the types of uses. So I have had some residents ask me about kind of like a 55 and over community, which I think usually consists of, maybe individual or, kind of joined housing. Is that an acceptable use? I know one of the things, and I don't want to say aged since I'm 55, so I'm not going to say that. But is that an acceptable use? Suppose it was, and I'm trying to think of any that are in Radnor, 55 and over communities right now. I don't know that we have any in particular. I know that, but what is that? How is that defined? What does that look like?
We don't have any regulations specifically addressing age qualified or age restricted housing. It would really depend on the specifics of the proposal. Are we looking at a single family development that is geared and marketed towards age qualified individuals over a certain age, or an age restricted community that has specific parameters in it? That could be deemed a residential use, and that would require some zoning relief. If we're talking about kind of a senior living facility, and depending on how the operator developer is proposing to operate it, and the specifics of it could fall into one of the categories that would require a special exception.
So could you give an example of some other types of development that could come forward that would automatically trigger a zoning change?
Wow, anything outside of those uses that listed earlier. So anything that, outside of as that first category, the uses that are permitted by right, and I'm looking at my code, a college, private or parochial elementary or secondary school. Those are some, if somebody were to operate a school like that, could come in and just file land development approval plans. Anything outside of those would need some sort of relief, either through the zoning hearing board special exception process or through some change in the code or a variance through the zoning hearing board.
Okay.
So any kind of really residential, what you would consider traditional residential development would require an amendment to the code or to the map or some sort of zoning relief in terms of a variance for use variance.
Okay.
Lisa,
So it's time. Oh, go ahead, John.
yeah, just to simplify, because zoning and land use, and it's a difficult concept for people that aren't involved with it on a regular basis to understand how this works. But we have our zoning code, and this particular district is a PI district. So if anybody wants to look at the uses that are permitted, they're in section 280-68. You can find that online, the Township zoning code, and that'll list them. And basically, there's two categories. There's the permitted by right without any further zoning hearing board approval, and they're simply either educational or religious type uses. Now, there's some specific variations in there, but that's the first that's permitted by right. And then the second are institutional type uses such as museums, and then homes for children, the age, indigent, handicapped, so more institutional, medical, health type facilities. That's the other category, but they have to go to the zoning hearing board. and get a special exception. So that's like a second level of scrutiny. Anything else is more difficult because it would involve amending the zoning ordinance. So 55 and over, or as I would call it, anyone that's 55 and over, active adult community.
John.
For those of us that are over 55. Some call it senior living, but it's 55 and over, active adult community. They're basically residential uses that the federal government has said you can discriminate against young people by excluding them from 55 and over communities. So, they're subject to federal law. There has to be at least one person that meets that age qualification. And you can't have anyone younger than that to live in there. So that's sort of an odd instance where housing is discriminated based upon age to the benefit of those of us that are active adults. So, and anything else, any other townhome, apartment, single family dwelling, any of those types of uses all involve amending the zoning ordinance, which is a sort of a higher scrutiny level at the township, because someone would have to propose a use. It would go through a legislative process, not a judicial process. And it's totally within the discretion of the 7 elected commissioners. If they don't like it, gets denied. There's really no appeal from that. I've heard a lot of people say over the years, well, so-and-so doesn't get what they want, they'll sue you and then they'll get it in court. Well, that doesn't really work that way with a zoning amendment. That is a totally discretionary decision that has very, very narrow grounds for any kind of an appeal. And there's really no provision for an appeal unless there's something that illegal occurring. So just on the basis of the merits of the plan, if the board doesn't like it for whatever reason, it can be denied. So that's the unknown. Township hasn't heard from anybody that's proposing a zoning amendment. There's been, I think, some sort of soft feelers, what's permitted, what's not permitted, but there's nothing specific that's come through the township building to, in terms of a proposal. All of these, no matter which of these 3 levels of uses goes through a public process, goes through the county township planning commission, goes in front of the board of commissioners on at least 2 occasions before there's any kind of a vote. So just to simplify it, it's there's a limited number of uses in this PI district. The 2 that I mentioned, one would require zoning hearing board approval, one would not. The category of schools or churches. And then anything else is a zoning amendment, which is fairly, as Kevin explained, would be a very long, drawn-out process, and would require an affirmative vote of the 7 commissioners.
And John, it's not about who purchased the property. So suppose a college or school purchased it and then said, oh, we want to use it for playing fields or something like that. That it doesn't matter who purchases it, it's the actual use that is what
Right.
is, okay.
Right. Whatever the proposed use is, would have to fall within these use regulations at 280-68. Otherwise, you would have to amend the zoning ordinance. So it's a confusing process for people that aren't involved in it on a regular basis. I know that. I've been doing this for a long time. And there's always rumors floating around. Don't believe 99% of them about who's, going to do what, or, I've heard some of them, they're bizarre. So just check with the township, keep on top of what's going on at the township, and anything that comes in gets posted on the website, and there'll be public meetings.
So with that, we have about a half an hour that I wanted to go to 7:30. So I'm, do any of the residents who are on this evening have questions, since we have kind of our Land and Zoning Brain Trust here. Does anyone have any questions that
Actually,
they want to ask?
There was, Ms. Renfrey had sent me a message. I don't know if she wants to ask that for the good of the group, or I can read it. I don't know if she's still on.
I see her. Emily, do you want to ask your question, or you want Kevin to just read it? She might have stepped away.
So it
Can read
asks that it seems like there's a typical time frame that has both consecutive and concurrent elements. What would you estimate would be the overall time frame if used as zoned or needed to be rezoned to say R1, et cetera, i.e. minimum time frame if a plan were to be filed tomorrow? So obviously the time frame is going to be different if it is approved or a use is coming in as a by right use. They just have to, they would be avoiding that zoning petition. Sometimes developers file things concurrently. Steve mentioned earlier the Concordia. Steve, that's been in for or in discussions for over a year now in terms of conversations with the developer. That's a project that is going through a rezoning petition, as well as simultaneously they needed zoning hearing board relief as well as land development approval. So we're probably fast approaching the year mark on that one.
I just saw a question pop up asking, Jean's asking, is Roberts Road a state or township road? It's already heavily traveled.
It is a township street. Roberts Road is a township road.
What if the property stays vacant for a while? Who maintains it?
So the property owner themselves, whoever the current owner is, if it's Gemma, then they are responsible. When they ceased operations there, they coordinate with our police department to make sure that, and township code officials in my department, to make sure that the buildings were secure and that there was no outward public safety issues. So our police are aware that the site is vacant. In terms of property maintenance, the property owner still has that obligation ongoing to maintain the property, to keep the grass cut and the buildings in some sort of good condition and secure. Obviously, as a vacant property, nobody's there, things can slip a little bit. So, whether it's our code officials or we get a complaint from a resident for one of the commissioners asking us to look into it, we would document the issue and then ask the property owner to address it. Should they not, and after proper notification, the township can step in and do some site maintenance, cutting the grass and things like that with our third-party contractor, and ultimately we would lien the property to recover those costs.
But I would just add, so there are board members, Gemma board members who've long been involved with the property prior when it was owned by the Presbyterians, and they live in our ward. I know that Gemma is working very hard to be good neighbors. I think they've been, doing that since they purchased the property. And I anticipate them continuing to, be good neighbors until the property is sold. So, I feel very confident. Like I said, the board members live right in the neighborhood. So they want the property to be well maintained as well. I see a bunch of other questions. So somebody asked about subdividing. Could part of the property be sold and subdivided? That's a good question.
Yeah,
Yes, there is a minimum lot area in all zoning districts. For the PI, the minimum lot area is 10 acres. I believe the site is a little over 40. But just because you have a certain size lot that has 2 or 3 times the minimum lot size does not mean you're going to get 2 to 3 lots out of it. There's road frontage, other things that factor into it, site constraints that just because the site is capable of being subdivided does not necessarily mean that it can be subdivided. Right now, again, it's PI. If somebody were to come in, the minimum lot area is 10 acres. And there are certain road frontage requirements for that, not less than 300 feet. I don't know off the top of my head how much frontage it has. But if it were to be zoned residential, you would expect to see some sort of residential subdivision to come in there for more than just one lot. It wouldn't be reasonable to have one residential lot on a size that site.
John, did you have something you wanted to add, or?
no, I mean, it can be subdivided, but there's, like, as Kevin said, the lot that gets subdivided off and the remaining piece has to meet zoning criteria, minimum lot size, setbacks, et cetera. So it's not a simple math calculation, 40 divided by 10. It depends on where the buildings are, that kind of thing. So, but certainly there can be a subdivision.
And how does the changes so the Board of Commissioners made changes to the density modification requirement. So we upped the amount of space required for density modification. So for residential, it has to be 25% open space now, as opposed to 15. And that cannot include wetlands, buffers. There was something else. I forgot there was a third thing.
Stormwater management.
Stormwater management. So that requires more open space that they have to accommodate, as well as on the planned institutional, we went from 0 requirement for open space to 15%. How would a subdivision, how would that impact that? And does it make it attractive to someone to want to subdivide if that's part of the requirement?
Well, they're gonna, if someone wants to subdivide the property, they're gonna propose a use on the piece that gets subdivided off. So whatever that use is, assuming it's one of the ones that's permitted currently in the PI, they're gonna have to show 15% of the tract as open space. And, you know, the open space requirement in the PI now would exclude buffer yards, floodplains, or wetlands, and also stormwater facilities, totally exclude those, where before, you know, developers had in some cases put their stormwater management in the open space areas, which, you know, we look today, stormwater management is not a nice green basin where kids maybe can run around, but it's a utility. It's like any utility, it's got to be maintained and it's got to be managed, otherwise it won't work. So, so that was a change that was just done in April of this year. That open space requirement was added in this particular zoning district, and for residential uses such as density modification.
Is there any limitations on height? Say they wanted to come in and put a 4-story facility for over 55 or what have you, rather than a lot of little cottages. Is that a possibility?
38 feet is the limit.
Height.
38 feet high, correct.
Well, currently, yes, in the PI district, it is 38 feet and 3 stories. So there's that added. Each district has its own unique height requirements, or what we call area and dimensional setbacks, amount of impervious coverage, amount of building coverage, and building height, and possibly the number of stories is regulated differently across different districts.
Thank you. Is there any possibility that they could open up the back part of the property that would eventually enter or dump out onto Yorkshire Road? Because it does Applegate and then Yorkshire.
So they could conceivably bring forth a plan that shows that connection. We would have to go through our ordinances, our traffic, everything to take a look at that to see if that would be acceptable or not, or if that, and I think there's one thing for everybody to understand. So staff, you know, generally speaking, is not for or against an application when it comes in, right? We're a neutral in the fact that we can only manage an application, a land development project based on our existing ordinances, based on the land development ordinance, based on the stormwater management ordinance, and the zoning ordinance that's been run through. So what I would say is it's conceivable, but we would have to take a look at that again, and to use that same term, depending on the use. I will tell you though that, as Kevin noted, we often meet with the developer before they submit an application. And we always tell them, I always say to them, look, you need to reach out to your surrounding residents who are abut or are near your development. You should talk to them, answer their questions up front. It would be prudent to do that. I always ask them for additional stormwater management. I always ask them for bigger buffers and more trees. These are asks. they're not things that I can enforce, but I do ask. So again, not to get too far off track, we would look at that possible connection based on the use in the ordinance and then traffic impact. We would definitely I would try to steer them away from that, ordinance or not.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this meeting. And there are some questions in the chat, so I want to get to those too. But, so that staff has a sense of, if people, that's something that's kind of a non-starter, that's something they can convey to a developer. And if they really want, it can help them ease the process, I guess. Steve, am I?
Yeah, and honestly, so for you folks, I grew up on Yorkshire Road, so I remember when Applegate was just a little stub back there. So I'm over 55, and I wouldn't even have to hear from you folks. If I saw it on the plan, I would immediately point that out to the applicant, that for the uses the solicitor and Kevin went through, not necessarily what we would want to see. Residential is different, but for those other uses, we would try to steer them away from that.
And I think it's also important to let everybody know, because I think we may have glossed over it. While we talked about the ability for the public to participate in the public meetings, every step of the way, there is a notification requirement. So when a subdivision land development plan is submitted, or zoning hearing board application, or a zoning map amendment, that would involve changing the map, there is a requirement to notify surrounding properties. It's usually 500 feet. In some cases, it could be up to 1,000 feet of properties that are within that distance from the subject parcel to receive some sort of notification from either the township or the applicant at the direction of the township.
So just in the chat, so there's a question about the historic mansion on the property, and is there an obligation for whoever purchases the property to keep and maintain the mansion, and is there any protection against demolition?
If it was regulated by the state, then it would have to follow the state or the national requirements for historic structures. The township does have historic regulations and 3 historic districts, but this property falls outside of that district. So they would just have to meet, if it's on listed as a one of the national or state registries, follow those guidelines.
But we do have our currently we are looking at a perhaps a scattered sites ordinance, but there is nothing right now that exists with the township. Does anyone know about the handoff from the Presbyterians to Gemma, and can you tell us something about Gemma? I don't know if any who wants to field that one. I know a little bit.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. As far as I know about the new owner, it was just they were intending to operate it similar to the Presbyterian Village.
Yeah, I think that so Gemma, they operate. They have a school that they operate. I think it's up in Bluebell, and it is for children who have experienced, who are suffering from like post-traumatic stress, children who have been in, abusive situations, children who have some other special developmental needs that are being addressed by the school. This was originally a residential, and I know that Commissioner Mulrooney has a lot of experience with children, who kind of fit this criteria. And I believe you stated in the past that residential, this kind of, residential facility where children live there and go to school and all of that, they're kind of trying to get away from that. I think you mentioned that in one of our last meetings.
Yeah, just in the world of child welfare and child protection, this congregate care setup is they're being reduced to ensure that kids are living in more home-like settings. So it may have affected their services, that they just had more property than they needed, but they did not go out of business. They're still serving kids, and it was the similar use to the original village.
And in talking with the board members that I am in contact with about this, what they will be doing is once the property is sold is reinvesting those dollars into the current facility that they do have and operate, which is more of like a day school kind of situation. So that is the plan for right now. Says the grass was recently cut, but they did not mow along Applegate Lane. Could they be made aware of that?
Yes, I saw that comment. I have a note. I will have my property maintenance inspector swing out there tomorrow, document it, and then we will reach out. So it may take a week or so for them to get on it. But yeah, if we're middle of July and you're seeing the same concerns, please reach out to me at the township.
Currently, there's an issue with stormwater runoff from the village that drains onto the properties on Applegate Lane. And I know that Mr. Norsini has been out there and talked with some residents. What would it take to have this issue resolved by new owners?
So again, everything will rely on the plans. So whatever project goes in, the applicant will be required to comply with the township's 2005 stormwater management ordinance. That being said, this is another one of those things, I'm aware of the situation, just like everybody's concerned about entrance to Applegate, where when we meet with the developer, I'd say, look, there's an issue here, and we're going to ask you to solve it or reduce it. In general terms, development from a stormwater management standpoint is a good thing. And I think people are sometimes aghast by that statement, but so you have the village, which was there when I was a kid. And like I say, without being specific, I'm over 55. So the village was there a long time. So the village predates our stormwater management ordinance. If someone new were to come in, and let's say they raised the existing site and built new, everything there, all that new impervious, the buildings, the streets, the patios, the porches, whatever it may be, have to be managed under our ordinance. Whereas today there is none. So basically there is uncontrolled runoff that can come from a property such as the village, meaning there was the stormwater requirements, every so often, the engineering standard of the day changes. So at the turn of the century, it really wasn't much of a standard. Back when Beaupre and the surrounding homes were built, the standard was get it into a pipe, get it into an inlet, and get it into the creek. When Applegate was built, it was different. We get it into stormwater management systems, and that's how it changes. So we would work with them to try to get them to address that by, again, without seeing plans and without looking at the topography. The one thing we all have to remember, if you're below somebody's property, you're going to get some runoff just physically by the fact that the elevation of your property is lower. We have a saying, and everybody gives me grief for my sayings, but everybody is below somebody when it comes to stormwater. So I get Commissioner Borowski's water, my water goes to Solicitor Rice. That happens. Our job, and through use of the ordinance, is to get them to manage that and hopefully make it better. So one thing we know would be better, the impervious surface would be managed. So right there, that's being ahead of the game. And then I would look specifically at the topography to see what's going on.
Steve, I would never let my stormwater run off onto you. So if rezoned, which of the many types of surrounding zones would be available to the landowner? And I think.
Yes, so I can show you the map again. I have that ready to call up, but it's R1, R1A, and as soon as I can find the share button, R2.
Can you define what that means? R1, R1A, R2, Kevin, how that is, how they're different, they differ?
Absolutely. So is the zoning map up on the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. So to the right of the site is R1, R1A is to the rear, and R2 is to the left of the site. These are residentially zoned districts. Each one has different area and dimensional requirements. R1 zoning is 1 acre zoning. R1A is slightly less, and R2, I don't have that one off the top of my head. So R1A rather.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the
lot
spot.
area, 30,000 square feet, and the R2 is 20,000 square feet. So that's the size, the minimum lot size requirement for those lots. 1 acre, 30,000 square feet in the back, and then 20,000 for the R2.
It says currently there's a nice buffer zone between the property and the neighboring residences. How, what township entity can ensure that the buffer is retained by the new owner regardless of the proposed use?
I don't know that we can ensure that. Depends on what they are proposing. It could, they would have to go through our shade tree, as Steve mentioned before, and look at the buffering. Depending on the use, new buffering may be required. That buffer that exists may meet those requirements, so the owner would want to keep it. Or depending on the grading that they're trying to do with stormwater management, some of that existing vegetation could be impacted, at which point the developer would have to replace it.
So if the buffer is encroached upon, they would need to replace it in some way?
Yes, there would be some sort of, through the Shade Tree Commission, the ability to look at vegetation that is removed, and depending on what the land use is coming in and how it would conflict with the existing land uses, the residential properties could require significant buffering. And that's all done through the subdivision land development process.
The residents have subsidized this property in the township as it has enjoyed tax-free status for decades. Why the push to rezone and subdivide? There's no push to rezone and subdivide at this moment. But if it doesn't sell at the current asking price, maybe it's priced as R1 and not institutional. I don't know what the
Just
answer
saying,
is.
just, that R1 might be a higher ticket price because you can make money on subdividing. So right now, I think, as you've heard, the Board of Commissioners doesn't have a real appetite to change the zoning because we don't know who's asking. And I think a lot of this is, we don't have answers and there's a lot of unknowns going on. To the comment above about the classical school across the street, I actually did speak
Oh,
to
I missed
someone
that,
there.
sorry.
That's okay. So they would be interested in a small piece of it. They don't have the capacity to take on a property of that size at this stage in their life cycle. So they actually did say if it's being subdivided, maybe we could have a piece. But again, that's probably not a deal that we're helping to broker, but maybe they could figure something out.
John, I don't know, did you have anything you want to add to that or around that question? You're on mute, John. I don't want to put you on the spot. I didn't know if you did or not.
Yeah, no, I think Moira addressed it. It's, it's zoned what it's zoned. There's no push to rezone it by the township. It's just, we know it's a big valuable piece of property and it's out there and somebody's going to want to do something with it at some point. So, but I mean, other than that, I think we're in a, as Moira said, we're in a wait and see in terms of development. It could sit there for some period of time. It could, as it's zoned the way it is now. So.
And the other thing, just to reiterate, I think we mentioned this before, and I think I put in a couple of my newsletters, any developer who wants to kind of take a temperature of the board, like, hey, what if I came in with a whole housing development? How would you feel about that? We've said, and John is saying, and the staff is saying, they need to come to the Board of Commissioners to a public meeting and present that. Like, they can't call me and ask me what I think and then call somebody else. Like, we are united in this. They would need to come and present this to the Board of Commissioners so that the residents would be completely aware of what what somebody could potentially be interested in. So this is a great question, Emily. And this is, I guess, kind of would be my dream of this, but how could the township go about purchasing the property and make it into a park recreational space? and what would that process be? Kind of make it something similar as the Haverford Preserve, which is certainly a lovely space, a lot more property there. And there was, I think, a lot how that deal was constructed, and John has, I think, a little more information about that, but that would be nice. Certainly we are, as a township, I think, constrained by the idea of the purchase price, but I don't know, John, maybe you want to
Well, I mean,
talk about that?
that's how does township go about doing that? Well, there's got to be a appetite on the Board of Commissioners to finance that, either by borrowing money or raising taxes or both. It's not something that it's a developable property. It's a valuable property. So it just comes down to what is the appetite to purchase 40 acres in a developed part of Radnor Township. I guess we're talking about in the tens of millions of dollars easily. There is no funds. There's nothing in the budget for it currently, but it's something that, if there's enough residents that think that that's a great idea, then, it's something that can be put to the voters. That's something that can be done for a property like that. That's happened before in Radnor Township. So, that's the only way it happens. This is not a couple acres to make a connection on a walking trail. This is a huge piece of property for Radnor Township. Would be very expensive. It's not impossible, but it'd be very expensive.
Well, let me know if people are interested in that.
Excuse me. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but could I comment on this quickly?
Sure.
So I had been sort of dreaming of like a park-like thing. Obviously, I think it would be a great idea. But I think that due to the financial burden that something like that would cause, we need to think bigger about it. And so I think it would be hugely beneficial if the township could acquire some of the property in the form of a diversity and inclusion center or some other community center that provides a good for the community that is currently lacking, in my eyes. The infrastructure on the property is already pretty extensive. I know there's a cultural arts center. I currently work for the Haverford Reserve, the Community Recreation and Environmental Center, and I know their fitness center has been very profitable, as well as rentals that they do for various events. The mansion is beautiful, has great opportunity. I know that affordable housing is a complex issue in Radnor, but a notable issue that this property has great opportunity to address. So I envision like a multi-generational, multicultural center that can really solidify Radnor's commitment towards diversity and inclusion, which I think we have addressed in this last year as a community. But I think we don't want it to be a shallow commitment. Like, I think this is a great opportunity for us to like commit ourselves and be a leader among the region towards a goal like this. So yeah, but obviously it involves being creative with finances and solutions and partners. I think the MacArthur Foundation, where they do the Just, Verdant, and Peaceful World, would be interested in it. Villanova University, DCNR. So yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
I think there's definitely a lot of possibilities. So,
Love that.
so I just want to make sure we get to everyone's questions here. So, is the PennDOT changes to the intersection of County Line and Roberts being reviewed in light of possible heavy traffic on Roberts Road with any change to the zoning at this parcel?
So I can take that. There was a traffic study. Sorry, I'm sitting outside and the storm's kicking up.
Yeah.
There was the County Line Corridor traffic study. There is one project being started that came out of that, and that's putting a light at Montrose. And Roberts is going to have some traffic control based on only right in, right out. So the throughway that was Roberts going all the way to Lancaster Avenue is actually now going to be diverted at County Line. So that's going to take care of some of the traffic flow issues and very much so the accidents on County Line. But we have definitely talked about, whatever kind of use this property has, that traffic on that road would be really difficult to see much increase. So that would be a very essential part of any plan.
So back to Applegate, when Applegate was extended from its stub, access rights to the south side of the road were given to Pico, and the land, oh, I'm sorry, first, what kind of company is Gemma? I think we answered that. So they operate educational facilities that provide education, social and emotional support to children who have very I think specific and particular needs. When Applegate was extended from its stub, access rights to the south side of the road and the land side of the road were given to Pico, and the land was given to what is now Gemma. Are there implications or any known way to support reducing the odds of a new road exiting onto Applegate?
So I think we did discuss this. That is something that we would, depending on the use, that makes a big difference as to whether they could or could not. I would definitely strongly discourage the developer from doing so. To Commissioner Mulroney's point, so again, this all depends on the type of use they're proposing. We can require a traffic impact study be done. And in that traffic impact study, I sit down with our appointed traffic engineer and go over the intersections that, and other criteria that they're going to have to show us. And we use that traffic impact study as a tool as to whether, the infrastructure can handle it. Would they be required to make changes and so forth? So just so everybody knows, definitely heard you loud and clear. Nobody wants anybody coming out onto Applegate. And I am fully aware of that, and we'll take that with me in any, whenever a meeting does occur.
Why did the Presbyterians give away their valuable property? I can't comment on the I don't think they gave it away. It was definitely a transaction.
It was a merger. It was a merger between two child serving agencies. So they did not hand it away. And in fact, I think they are still engaged with Gemma at the other facilities.
Okay.
I think the Lutherans and the Presbyterians came together. My understanding.
Who is above the village from a stormwater perspective?
So I would have to look at the topography. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who's higher, but again, that's all things that are addressed in that subdivision land development. The topography, the deeds, all that is evaluated. It's a requirement of submission, and it's things that we go through with a fine-tooth comb.
So back to a question about the mansion, the only way for residents to weigh in on saving that mansion is to participate in public hearings. I mean, I think, so again, the reason for this meeting was to hear from people, kind of what are your thoughts about the property? What would you like to see? What would, I think that obviously saving the mansion is something that, residents are very interested in. I've heard from people, not even, from around the township who are concerned about preserving, sites that are historically important to Radnor, which I think that mansion is. So, certainly that might be, I think it's good for us to have talked about this on the front end. So anyone who may come in, again, that's kind of, I would see that as one of those things to make it more, and if you're coming in as a developer and how you want to work with the neighborhood and what you want to do on a property to make it, more, I guess, inviting, or make your development more inviting to the neighbors, and there be more collaboration. I think that's good. But unfortunately, right now, we don't have anything that the township can say which would save, which we can say, you have to preserve that mansion. Am I right, John, Steve, Kevin?
That's my understanding.
Correct.
And I guess to the point, to the question, you're hearing from Commissioner Borowski. Other commissioners are very interested in this property as well. But this is a really important part of the process, is to hear from the community at every stage. So whether it's showing up to a town hall, writing a letter to your commissioners, this is how we know what the community wants and how to be most responsive to it. So I really am grateful everybody came out tonight, and I, really would encourage you to continue to talk to us about it, and keep an eye on events that we will continue to speak to the community about it.
And as I mentioned earlier, so we did, the commissioners, there was a group that had put forth a historic scattered sites ordinance several years ago. We've revisited that. It's being kind of sent through a process for review, but it could be a lengthy process. But if it comes about, if things kind of solidify or whatever, that could potentially be something that we might be able to use. But right now we don't really have anything, but it is good for everybody to voice that. And I think any potential buyers, it's good for them to be aware that that's something important to the community. So we see one more, we'll take one more. In addition to Philip Gilbert's comment about Diversity Inclusion Center, given the open space and new greenhouse on the property, is there a way to add components of land climate component that could be used integrally with some of the learning programs at Radnor Township schools? That's another great idea for the use of the property. It would be great if we could get something like that going. But again, we would need to first consider, can we purchase the property, or could the school district purchase the property? Or so those are things that we would need to think about and consider. Uses would have to come after that, but any last rounds? I don't know, John, Steve, Kevin, if you guys have anything you want to, any final words, or Maura, any final words?
Yeah, I just thank you, Commissioner, for hosting this meeting tonight. Love getting out and meeting with and talking with our residents. Just again, want to reiterate that a very long process is in front of us, a very long road with many opportunities for the public to comment. Meetings like this are great to get a sense of what people's thoughts and feelings are on these properties. So thank you.
Commissioner, just along the same lines of what Kevin and Commissioner Mulroney stated. So Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners are public meetings. I strongly urge you will get a mailer if you're within 1,000 feet of the development for Planning Commission. Strongly urge you to attend and let the Planning Commissioners hear your concerns, because again, we review everything through the ordinance, and yet we do request things, as I noted previously. But it is really important that the Planning Commissioners hear what you have to say, the Board of Commissioners, staff. You can email or call us anytime with questions or your concerns. And I take pretty copious notes, so these are all in the file waiting for the time when somebody comes in to discuss this. So Commissioner, thank you very much. Thanks for having us here, and it was great to see everybody tonight. Hunker down, it looks like the storms are coming.
Yeah. John, do you have anything to add?
No, nothing to add. Just ask Norsini at radnor.org or Kay Kachansky at radnor.org for any questions, but stay involved. And your questions will get answered. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. I want to thank John and Steve and Kevin for being on, and Maura as well. And certainly, and Maura and I publish newsletters. So in addition to notification that Steve mentioned that will come out like automatically from these from the planning commission if anything goes forward. We are always staying on top of it and trying to get word out to the residents. So if you want, and you can email either Maura or I or both of us and get on our newsletters. If you don't already receive them, we're glad to add you, and then you'll be able to get information that way as well. So, and no, you can't drive up. It would be trespassing. It is still private property. So do not, Barbara, I see your question. So let's respect that it is still owned. Are still owners. It is, although it is up for sale, it is still owned by Gemma. So I just want to thank everybody again. Please feel to email me or Maura, and thanks all so much for joining. And this has been recorded, and it will be up on the Township YouTube for anyone to watch who is unable to attend, and I'll share that out also. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Good
Stay
night.
safe.
Stay dry.
Thank you, Ian.
You're welcome. Have a good one, Lisa.
You too.